Senators, I see that we have quorum and I declare this meeting in session. Welcome to this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on National Security, Defence and Veterans Affairs. I'm Tony Dean, representing the province of Ontario, the chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by my fellow committee members who I ask to introduce themselves, beginning with Senator Dasko.
My name is Donna Dasko and I'm a senator from Ontario.
Senator O, I'm from Ontario.
Kim Pate, I live here in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Welcome.
Couture, Nova Scotia.
Andrew Cardozo, Ontario.
Rebecca Patterson, Ontario.
Welcome, Marty Deacon, Ontario.
Thank you. And to my left is the clerk of our committee, Erica DuPont. For those watching the session, we are continuing our study of Bill C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, all related to the regulation of firearms. I'm going to start by saying that during this meeting we are going to be discussing topics related to gun violence. This might be disturbing to some people in the room, as well as some who are watching and listening at home. If you require support, there are services available 24/7, toll-free, through Wellness Together Canada. The phone number to call is 1-866-585-0445, 1-866-585-0445. Senators and parliamentary employees are also reminded that the Senate's Employee and Family Assistance Program is available to them and offers short-term counselling for both short-term and work-related concerns, as well as crisis counselling. Today we're going to hear from two panels of anti-violence and women's organisations. In our first panel we have the pleasure of welcoming by video conference Suzanne Zaccour, Head of Feminist Law Reform with the National Association of Women and the Law. And with us in the room today from PolyRemembers, Poly-Souvian, Heidi Rathjen, Coordinator, and Nathalie, Provost, Spokesperson. And from the Islamic Cultural Centre of Quebec City, Boufeldja Benabdallah, spokesman of the Quebec City Mosque, CCIQ. Thank you all for joining us today. We invite you to provide your opening remarks, to be followed by questions from our members, and I remind you that you each have 5 minutes for your testimony. And we start today with Ms. Suzanne Zaccour. Ms. Zaccour, please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm here for the National Association of Women in the Law and to speak for victims who are threatened, intimidated, controlled, terrorized, and even killed through the use of firearms. I'm here for the women for whom Bill C21 will help clear a path to safety. We have been advocating for laws to better protect women's rights for the last 50 years. We studied this bill closely, provided input to the House of Commons Committee, and collaborated with other women's rights organizations. And we're grateful for the opportunity to share our thoughts with the honorable members of this committee. Thanks to this bill, chief firearms officers will have to promptly revoke licenses in situations of domestic violence, and people subject to protection orders will immediately become ineligible to have a firearms license for the duration of the order. We are happy to report that the House of Commons Committee adopted virtually all the proposals listed in our brief to improve the domestic violence provisions in this bill. Yet some commentators will have you believe that this bill will not protect women because it focuses on, quote, law-abiding citizens. There's a rhetoric that if someone has been background checked, they're not a threat. That if someone is a legal gun owner, they're not violent. That the problem is only gangs and street violence and loose borders. That's a dangerous rhetoric. Domestic violence is not exceptional. Unfortunately, abusers don't walk around with "I'm violent" written on their forehead. The idea that people who appear law-abiding, who pass a background check, or who have a particular hobby cannot be abusers is the domestic violence myth. I hope the honorable senators will be impervious to sexist myths and will base their analysis on what the violence against women experts are saying. Over 30 feminist organizations endorsed our briefs or our Women for Gun Control Coalition. We believe in this bill and we want it passed. But we fear losing it due to harmful rhetoric that attempts to trivialize women's safety concerns by suggesting that it's a consideration that should somehow receive the same weight as, or even less weight than, not being able to participate in a particular reenactment with a real working weapon, or having to alter a collectible, or one's hobby losing in popularity, or shooting clubs making less profit. Before the House, we supported conditional licenses for people who, despite having committed domestic violence, would be allowed continued access to firearms for their subsistence. Subsistence in the face of hunger and safety in the face of violence are two important concerns. But the same cannot be said of some of the supposedly dramatic consequences that you've been hearing about. Hobbies and enjoyment are important, but recreation can never trump safety. So far, conversations about this bill have been insufficiently focused on women. Women's groups were underrepresented as witnesses before the House of Commons. Thankfully, this committee has seen fit to invite more experts to speak on violence against women. And some of the honorable senators have chosen to direct witnesses' attention to this issue when it's been ignored. It is your job to listen to all viewpoints, but you don't have to give them all the same weight. For the population I represent here today, the stakes are high, the interests are serious and legitimate, and the time for action is now. So please don't let women become an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zaccour. We're now going to hear from representatives from Poly-Souvian, and I understand that Ms. Provost will be delivering opening remarks today, and we invite you to begin whenever you're ready.
Bonjour.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I thank all the members of the committee for inviting us to appear before you today.
I will make my opening remarks in English and deliver them in French outside the room afterwards. Since the mass shooting at l'École Polytechnique on December 6, 1989, where 14 women were murdered and 14 more women and men were injured, I have traveled to Ottawa more times than I can count to meet with ministers, MPs, senators, and bureaucrats, and to testify before committees like this one today. I have done this as the spokesperson for Poly-Souvian, a volunteer-based gun control advocacy organization founded by witnesses, survivors, and families of victims of the femicide at my school. Because I was shot 4 times that night, I am a survivor of this mass shooting. I am sure every senator in this room shares our goals. We seek to prevent more homicides, suicides, threats, femicide, and injuries caused by guns. We especially want to ensure that no one else has to grieve the violent murder of their mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, husband, wife, classmate, or colleague. Yet, 34 years have passed since my blood mingled with that of my classmates as they died at my side, and during those years, there have been many more mass shootings. In Moncton, in 2014, where 3 RCMP officers were murdered and 2 were injured. In Penticton, BC, in 2015, where 4 people were murdered. In Fredericton in 2018, where 2 police and 2 civilians were murdered. In Vaughan, Ontario in 2022, in a condo complex where 5 were murdered and 1 were injured. These are only a few examples, and they are in addition to the one at the Quebec Mosque, as well as those mentioned by previous witnesses related to the Danford shooting, the Portapique massacre, and the school shooting at Dawson College. In fact, nothing, I repeat, has really changed in a tangible way with respect to legal access to weapons and accessories designed for maximum casualties that should be banned. Nothing has really changed. This sad situation underlies the predictability of future mass shootings unless something is done. And today, we urge you to pass Bill C21 without amendments and as quickly as possible. It is a good bill, not perfect, not complete, but it freezes handgun sales and helps protect women from domestic murders. It will save lives. However, we urge you to advocate for the government to proceed rapidly with new regulations to ban existing assault-style weapons, namely the hundreds of models that were arbitrarily exempted under the 2020 prohibitions. And thirdly, we urge you to advocate to strengthen the regulations on magazines in order to eliminate all loopholes and exemptions that allow them to hold more than 5 rounds. Finally, as you work to fulfill one of your greatest responsibilities, that is to protect the safety of the citizens you were nominated to represent, we hope you will consider the following. 1. That countless surveys demonstrate that the majority of Canadians support the key measures in C21. 2. That the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commissions recommended prohibiting all center-fire semi-automatic firearms designated to accept magazines with more than 5 rounds, not only elusive future ones, and to limit magazine capacity at 5 for all guns. 3. That the claims and statistics coming from gun rights groups should never be taken at face value. Their twisting of the facts distorts the debate, and their disinformation succeeded in thwarting an evergreen ban on assault weapons in the bill. Dig a little deeper, please, and most time you will find a very different set of facts. And finally, consider that your work today and in the coming weeks is nothing less than seeking to save lives. Please remember Angie Sweeney and her 3 young children aged 6, 7, and 12, who were all shot and killed in a case of intimate violence just last week in Sault Ste. Marie. Among other things, this is what C21 is aiming to prevent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Provo. Our third witness today on this panel is Mr. Boufeldja Benabdallah, and please, we invite you to start whenever you're ready.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les...
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of the Senate, senators, it is always with a good deal of emotion, with a certain amount of, I won't say bitterness, but I would almost say fear that I appear to speak about this topic. We have done so dozens of times, trying to convince people that these weapons still out in Canadian society should be banned to ensure that all Canadians be able to live safely and enjoying their lives in Canada. Our children are at issue. These firearms are used to assault children in school. I'm a child of war. I'm Algerian by nationality, and when I was a child, I would see military personnel coming in and shooting citizens. I could see how a weapon in the hands of a soldier give them a strength of a titan, because they feel so much stronger when they carry a weapon. And this is exactly what firearm lobbyists hope in insisting that these devices remain available to Canadians. When they pick up such a weapon, they feel strong. They don't feel strong without them. Our community is paying a great deal of attention to this bill when we'd like to see it passed. I am a commissioner for an a city in Quebec, a town, a very inclusive community, and I tell them that at the House of Commons, this is being examined, that senators are examining this matter, and everyone is happy about this. They don't say, oh, well, that's fine, they can just do what they want. They say, no, this is wonderful. Given that the wounds are still open in our minds after the tragedy that affected our mosque. We are very happy. We are not lamenting, believe me. We are very happy to know that once again we're able to come before you to tell you that Bill C21, with its potential prohibition of handguns, is a very good thing, and we're very pleased to see that Parliament is moving forward on this, and we certainly hope that by adopting this bill that we will see fewer weapons in Canada. I will not speak of technicalities. There are better people for that than me, but I will say from the depths of my heart, do not turn away from our society those who are so pleased to be in such a blessed country, unique country, an unusual country where children and adults can walk around without fear, can go to work without fear. Please don't send this back to the House of Commons for further discussions there. Please carry it here at the Senate. There's just a small step to do so. We know that this bill does not cover assault weapons, and of course, we have tried very hard to ensure that they be banned as well, but we will continue to do that. Then there may be regulations, of course, that may cover assault weapons. And we're not against that. We are waiting to see whether the minister is in a better position to adopt regulations and apply them to cover assault weapons. I understand, Chair, that this is a difficult matter, but you have enough statistics, you have enough technical material, I'm sure, before you. So what I can say is something honest from a citizen. You are our hope. You are the hope for thousands of Canadians. You know, it's good to be wise, to be philosophical, and we're calling on your wisdom. We recognize that you care about this country, and you are writing our history now. This is a good thing for the safety of Canada. Generations to come will always remember you and will thank you. But I will speak for myself as well. I myself would like to thank you first before they get to do so. Thank you.
Colleagues, our guests are with us till 12:30. We'll do our best to allow time for each member to ask a question. We will allot 4 minutes for each question, including the answer, and I will hold up this card to indicate that 30 seconds remain in your time. I ask that you keep your questions succinct and to identify the witness that you are addressing. Our first question today goes to Senator Couture.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being with us and for sharing those challenging and difficult stories. It's not easy. I have two questions, one to Suzanne and then one to Ms. Zaccour. I'll say them consecutively. And Ms. Zaccour, if we don't get time to hear from you, if you could send us a written response, I'd appreciate that. So the first question, in previous witness testimony, we've heard about substantial amounts of disinformation being spread about gun violence and gun ownership, much of which seems to mirror similar rhetoric from the United States. Recently, I've received many letters and emails urging me to view a Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights video, which I did, and I could not help but notice the images that evoke the myth of the American frontier. Have you seen the video? And if so, what are your thoughts about it? And then while you're thinking about that, I'll just ask Ms. Zaccour. I just want to thank you for drawing our attention to the logic fallacy of false moral equivalencies that we hear in the rhetoric on this bill. A study just published in Epidemiology once again confirmed the validity of your remarks, and I'll quote, "We find a strong, consistent evidence supporting the hypothesis that restrictive state gun policies reduce overall gun deaths, homicides committed with a gun, and suicides committed with a gun." Could you please comment on the disinformation that you have seen that denies that relationship?
So, thank you, Senator. I have seen the video, and I think three main points strike me in terms of what disinformation it contains. Disinformation or difference of opinion. So, for example, the representative of the CCFR says, for example, that the freeze on handguns renders current handguns worthless because at the end of one's life, one can't leave it to their to be inherited by kids, and so it's not, it's it eliminated the monetary worth of all these weapons. Our opinion is that the value of handguns for people who purchase handguns is not in their resale value, it's in their use. And I think to demonstrate that is if you look at the number of handguns that were purchased in the 3 months following the announcement of the freeze, about 200,000 handguns were purchased in a matter of 3 months, knowing that the freeze would be in effect. And so they wouldn't have purchased them had they shared the opinion that they would be worthless after the freeze. Another point was saying that a freeze on handguns, because it affects the legal market, would have no impact on handgun-related crime and homicide. That's just not true. There's been a number of cases where legal gun owners have used their handguns to shoot and kill people, including mass shootings, and including owners who were members of gun clubs. And Alexandre Bissonnette, who was the author of the mosque shooting, was a member of a gun club, and he used a legal Glock and 5 10-round magazines to commit his crime. And there's been many others, including the Dawson shooter as well, and the Concordia University shooter. And I think the third point was using all these clips from police representatives who were talking about the sources of crime guns. The gun lobby says that 99% or 90%, it's always a high number, of crime guns are illegally sourced to the United States that are smuggled into Canada. That's just not true. A lot of these police chiefs, what they were saying is that many guns that are used in crime are stolen so they're illegally purchased, they're illegally acquired. And for example, in prairies, most of the crime guns are long guns, and most of those are stolen from legal gun owners. I think the most important, we don't have comprehensive.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
Rathjen. We must move on. We have a number of senators in the lineup, and we're over time. We move next to Senator Deakin, Ontario, who will be followed by Senators O. Anderson, Beam, Dasco, Boisvenu, Cardozo, and Dagenet. Senator Deakin, Ontario.
Thank you. I do have a question, and I will direct to Ms. Zaccour, but I just was wondering if you wanted to finish that last sentence of Senator Kucher's question, just to finish that last piece or not. Would you like to do that?
Sure, thank you. So there's, it's for sure that the gun lobby often cites 90% or 86% of crime guns are smuggled from the United States. That's true for Toronto for handguns, but it's not true for all of Canada, and we don't have comprehensive data for all of Canada, but what we do have is RCMP, who numbers that they gave an answer to such a question before the House of Commons committee, and they said that about 70% of crime guns that are traced are domestically sourced, and that's about 40%, 60% for handguns.
Thank you, and thank you for that. And welcome to all of you today. I think the Senate, we all around the table have great empathy for your fatigue on this topic and for your continued work to try to get this right. And we do appreciate all of you being here today. Ms. Zaccour, in your submission that you did, in the brief that you presented, you mentioned in there that you do not agree with the red flag laws, stating that it puts the guns on the onus of the victim. But you also, in your input, said you go on to say the bill needs to be passed quickly and as quickly as possible. So my question is, I want to make sure, am I right to assume that you don't want the red flag law provisions removed or changed in this bill, if it would mean delaying its passage since we would then have to send it back to the House. I'm just going to ask that question first and then come back.
Thank you for the question. That's correct. We believe for most women, it will be much easier to just get a protection order that will trigger loss of license rather than go through the courts and through this red flag ex parte measure, which will be exceptional and hard to access. But after, I think, 16 months of study of this bill and the way it went in the House of Commons, our recommendation is to adopt the bill without amendments, even though this measure we think will be less effective than the yellow flags, which we've proposed changes to at the House of Commons.
Thank you. And with that in mind, still a little time. Thank you. With that in mind, then, you also mentioned that a violent spouse could reapply for a license shortly after losing it and retaliate, frankly, against their partner or ex-partner. And for example, a person could become ineligible to hold a license for a month due to a 30-day protection order and apply for a new license on that 31st day. Is this a reference to the 30-day period in that proposed red flag law? And how does that system currently work if police or a chief firearms officer makes the application? What is the timeline there?
So the comment you're referring to was more about the yellow flags. So the ineligibility is for the duration of the protection order, and in some provinces, it's common to have protection orders that last 30 days. So that means that after the expiry, the person could reapply for a firearms license. So it will be, we hope that chief firearms officer will really take this into account and take it seriously and not just kind of necessarily approve reapplications if the person is dangerous. So that's the issue that we were alluding to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator O is next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. First of all, I'd like to express my appreciation for all of you that are appearing here and my sympathies for the terrible events that you have experienced. And I was very honored that last year I traveled with the Human Rights Committee to the mall. And I want to thank Doctor for showing me around what happened in the mall. My question is, we may disagree on the impact of Bill C21, but I want to get your thoughts. What has happened to the individual who murdered 6 innocent people and gravely wounded 5 others in Quebec City? This individual would originally given a life sentence with no parole for 40 years for his horrific attack, but our Supreme Court unjustly determined that the individual must be eligible for parole, so it struck down this sentence, which was actually already on the lenient side given what this individual did. In my view, this decision sent completely wrong message about how seriously we as a society should take a crime like this, which not only involved in the murder of 6 people, but was attack on a house of worship. I would like to ask our witnesses, how concerned are you about this decision, which to me clearly illustrates how broken our justice system is. C21 is not going to stop illegal gun smugglers over the border. We got to do something, otherwise only on one C21 is not good enough. Can you express your view, please?
Oui, merci, Senator O.
Thank you, Senator O. Your question refers to a considerable debate ongoing in our community and among Canadians in general. It is true that Canada is gives everyone a chance in as much as anyone can regret their crimes, be rehabilitated, and start a new life. That said, justice must be strict and exemplary. A for life sentence for Mr. Bissonnette and no right to parole for at least 40 years. In a sense, this was fair. And indeed, when the Supreme Court handed down a different decision, we were not happy. Our community was not happy because this may send a message to others who are at risk of carrying out such horrible acts, to the effect that justice, just assumes that everyone can change their mind and be changed. No consideration for the 17 orphans, the wounded. There is still a wounded person who's in a wheelchair and cannot feel his body from here down and has only one arm that he can use. So, by doing something about all the weapons that cause this damage, we would like to ensure that such horrible things don't happen again. We want to get these weapons out of Canada. We don't want Canadians to be carrying them. We want to be able to live in peace.
That we've completed the time for that question. Hopefully we can get back to you. Senator Anderson is next.
Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. My question is for Ms. Zaccour from the National Association of Women in the Law. I note that your association is classified as a national association. Upon reviewing your website, it is noted that appears to be no direct representation from any of the 3 territories, the NWT, Nunavut, and the Yukon. I also note that the letter you submitted to this committee in October is endorsed by 17 organizations, none of which are situated in any of the 3 territories. Given the absence of clear representation from the 3 territories, can you elaborate on how your findings represent and are inclusive of any of the 3 territories and their realities? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. We do not represent the viewpoint of the territories. As you've noted, they're underrepresented in our organization. We've worked to build partnership with partners in Yukon in particular. We're not a membership-based organization. We collaborate with various organizations that are either national in scope or regional, depending on the issue.
Thank you. In light of what you just said, you referred to guns as for hobbies and enjoyment. I am from the Arctic. I'm from Tuktoyaktuk Northwest Territories. I would like to say that hunting for us is a lifestyle. It's a subsistence hunting. It provides food security, it addresses high costs of living, and it allows us to survive in our harsh environment. Can you elaborate on what you based your opinion on when you spoke about guns as hobbies and enjoyment?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify my statement. What I said is that there are 2 different levels of interest. In some cases, there's the use of firearms for subsistence, especially in Indigenous communities, which we supported by supporting the conditional exemption. So even in cases of domestic violence, allowing Indigenous people to have their firearms license or other people who need it to sustain themselves and their family. This is something we were supportive of. And what I invited the senators is to see when these are important factors that can be kind of considered, factored, balanced, versus some of the witnesses that have come here to this Senate and have said, well, this shooting club is going to make less profits, or I know someone who has a valuable collectible or who likes to do reenactment and won't be able to have this weapon or will have to alter it to be able to participate. So I really invite senators to see the difference, the hierarchy of importance and needs. So someone who needs a firearm to survive, that's a valuable and important need. Someone whose life is at stake due to domestic violence, that's a legitimate interest and important need. Someone who comes to the Senate and say, I use firearms for recreation, it's my hobby, as some witnesses have referred to these specific populations. And these are interests that they're still interests, but they're less important. So this is the kind of testimony that I was referring to.
Thank you. We go next to Senator Beam.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here. My question is for Madame Provost, and this is on the topic of a handgun ban impacting sports shooters. One of the concerns that has been raised by various gun control groups, including PolyRemembers, is the potential for the Olympic exception, entre guillemets, to be used as a loophole by bad actors. And witnesses from whom we heard during Monday's hearings referred to their feeling that this really comes down to an argument between a hobby and safe communities. So how would you weigh the valid concerns of sports shooters, and there are many groups and clubs across the country, against the valid fears of victims and women's groups?
I will ask my colleague Heidi to answer in English, but you're welcome to speak in French. However, she has more details to share with you.
70% of Canadians want to ban all handguns, so total ban on all handguns. This is a freeze on handguns with an exception for Olympic competition, coaches, athletes, and so on for the Olympics. Right now, if you want, most of the owners of handguns are target shooters. That's the reason why they can have handguns. We want to ban handguns, so obviously that's going to impact the sport of that uses handguns. We fear that the Olympic exemption, because it doesn't specify which guns or the type of guns, and in the bill it only requires a letter from the Shooting Federation to the CFO, could be exploited by the handgun community to allow people who are not genuine Olympic athletes to claim they want to be. And I mean, good luck proving the difference between somebody who's genuinely involved and wants to become an Olympic handgun shooter compared to somebody who says they want to. You can't tell the difference. So one of the gun groups, the BC chapter of the International Practical Shooting Confederation, who also wanted an exemption but didn't get it at the level of the House, wrote in one of their bulletins that if they would get an exemption like that, they would become the pathway to handgun ownership in Canada, and they can expect a huge increase in membership. The fear is still there that this exemption will be exploited, and that's why we're hoping that regulations will make it have very tight restrictions on who will be exempted. And I don't think, I think previous witnesses said that there were very few handgun athletes at the Olympics, about an average of 5 per year over 30 years. In our opinion, that is not worth undermining the freeze on handguns to maintain that specific sport.
Thank you. Do I still have one moment?
30 seconds. Yeah.
Oh, 30 seconds. Do you think we could learn something from other jurisdictions in countries where there are stricter laws, but they still have sports shooters?
I'm not very familiar. I know that the UK, they do have very limited permits, for like a handful of permits for elite Olympic sports shooters that use handguns. I don't think that's comparable to what we're potentially facing with the exemption that's in this bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Dasco is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. You mentioned the voices of women. It was mentioned earlier, and I'm so pleased that at this committee we've had some extraordinary women testifying so far, and today is no exception. I have two questions. The first one is for Madame Provost. Minister LeBlanc was here last week, and he commented on, and this is with respect to the issue of assault weapons that are still out there, and he commented with respect to his intentions going forward in terms of how to deal with it, setting up a council and so on. So I'd like to ask what your expectations are of that process. What are you looking for? What are you hoping to achieve from that process? And Madame Zaccour, I wonder if you could speculate. There was a court decision this Monday on this past Monday on assault weapons, and I wonder if you might provide your analysis of the importance of that and how it might impact C21. Thank you.
Assez rapidement.
Quickly then, we were very pleased to hear the speech made by Mr. Leblanc, what he presented to you last week. We felt that it was a response to the lack of a clear definition that we saw in the month of May. So by regulatory means then, the definition will be strengthened and fleshed out, that which is found in the bill. But we do feel that the bill must be adopted in order to be able to go ahead with proper regulations. So the bill is valid in that sense. And we are happy to feel that the minister understands our concerns at PolyRemembers. We want to ensure that of the 2020 Order in Council, well, there are a number of weapons that weren't earmarked, even though they are assault weapons, and they're now out in the market. Very unfortunate. So this matter hasn't been fully solved. There's also the high-capacity cartridges issue, which is a fundamental issue, as has been said in our opening statements. Very often, there should be an inability to ever use high level cartridges with in any weapon.
The intent expressed by the minister to do a second order in council to complete those from 2020, we welcome that intent. Of course, we have to see it happen. But what's relevant with C21 is that C21 will reverse a previous measure implemented under the Harper government that allows the cabinet or the minister to reverse prohibitions. So C21, once passed, will protect the orders in council in the sense that a government, unless it goes through legislation, so a vote in the House and in the Senate, it won't be able from one day to the next to declassify all the weapons that have been prohibited. So that's why we support the orders in council reinforced by what's going to be in what's in the bill once passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our guests, Ms. Zaccour, Mr. Benabdallah, Ms. Rathjen, Ms. Provost. I don't think that anyone around our table agrees to any type of violence or the type of violence that you have experienced. These things must be stopped. Since 1966, government after government has adopted legislation in this matter. This is the 9th being adopted on the matter of gun control. My first question, are you less angry than you were in the month of May about this bill? Because I read in a La Presse article in May that you really, really were quite angry about this, angry at the government. What's your position now? Yes, well, we heard Minister Leblanc express quite clearly his will, his political will, to take this further, to ensure that there was a complete and total ban on assault-style weapons. In the letter that I sent to Mr. Trudeau last May, I didn't say that the bill was totally wrong. I said it was incomplete and that I found this unfortunate from our point of view, at least from PolyRemembers' point of view. But when, you say that the government has crossed you, has betrayed you, that's quite something. Well, but I've been watching your point of view and how it's evolved for a number of years. Your overall philosophy, I think, is to ensure that no weapons are sold in Canada, that guns are banned. Well, PolyRemembers has always fought for a ban on assault-style weapons. A long gun is not an assault-style weapon, nor is a handgun. If all currently legal firearms were banned, do you think this bill would have any effect on illegal weapons? Weapons that come in illegally, that are smuggled into Canada, that are used by street gangs. If we reduce the number of weapons that are legally circulating in Canada, I imagine, I'm not a police officer, I'm not working in a police force, but I think that the illegal ones will show up more. We'll see what they are. We'll be able to identify them, and there will be less of them overall. As Heidi has said, there's a great deal of disinformation circulating about criminality and the use of illegal firearms, what happened to me, what happened at the Quebec mosque. Most of these mass shootings were carried out by people using legal weapons. We know that the feminicides and domestic violence is rising, and organized crime, street gang violence is rising. But otherwise, there are less crimes since 1979. That's according to the registers that we have. So I say that if crimes, homicides committed with firearms, if it's mostly gang violence, and because feminicides, it's often with a blade, with a knife, by strangling, not necessarily with a firearm. How are we going to manage to get the firearms out of the hands of these young gang members? They're often young, 17, 18 years old. How is this bill going to affect that? It's false to say that the bill will have no effect on the illegal firearm market. There are provisions in it. Well, that's what was said last week, no? Well, that's not the aim. It's true, the principal aim of the bill, but there are measures covering legal firearms. There are maximum penalties, though, that are higher. There are ghost weapons. That's addressed in the bill. Yes, but Bill C5 is being carried by the government. So,
Senator Bobineau and the witness, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've gone past our time. We now move to Senator Cardozo.
Merci, Madame, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Provost. Ms. Provost, I would like to thank you so much for being here with us today. As a survivor, I know that your testimony is difficult for you to bring to us, so I thank you for doing so. Mr. Benabdallah, I have the same to say to you. The events that took place in the Mosque of Quebec were truly tragic, and I thank you for being here today and your efforts to improve public policies and the Government of Canada's policies.
Thank you for your presentation. I note the range of people who have supported your brief. I also note the absence of organizations from the North, as was pointed out by my colleague, Senator Anderson, and I urge you to connect with people there, although I know you're a nonprofit group, so you don't have a lot of resources, but that's an important part of the country. I am impressed with, I know of NAL and have had the good fortune to work with the organization over many years. I won't talk about how many years, but the organization is certainly a venerable organization that has defended and advanced women's rights, and I have a great deal of respect for the organization, so I thank you for the work you've done. I also note that the people you've consulted with and who support your brief come from across the country. There's the Calgary Legal Guidance, La Fédération des Femmes du Québec, Network of Women with Disabilities Now, the South Asian Legal Clinic of Toronto, and the Women's Center for Social Justice. So I want to thank you for bringing to us the views that many organizations have supported. I'd like your thoughts briefly, and if you get a chance, either Madame Provost, Madame Rathjen, about how you go about keeping in touch with your members or the people you speak for. And I ask this in the sense of how much do you consult with them and how legitimate. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the legitimacy of who you represent, because that is sometimes challenged. and I want you to take a chance to the opportunity to reassure us of the approach you take. Maybe Madame Provost first, and then Madame Zaccour.
Je suis
It's 45
très
seconds.
étonnée.
I'm really surprised to be asked whether my legitimacy speaking for the Polytechnique is real. You know, on the 8th of December of that year, I was on a hospital bed speaking not only as a victim, given that I had been wounded, but speaking for the entire Polytechnique community, calling on everyone to stand up and do something. My colleague José Martin, another student, was also wounded with me. The families of the students, we remain in touch with them all, and our student colleagues of the time support us with all their networks. We are an organization that is open-door organization. An association simply, not even a not-for-profit, and we work closely with the people who were affected and our community. I'm involved in my community as a professional as well, and it's based on all of this that I speak to you here today.
That on the record clearly for us. Thank you. Madame Zaccour?
I'm afraid we have
We're
to
out of time.
move on. Senator Dagenet is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. My question is being directed to Mr. Benabdallah. This bill it gives a sort of a non-negotiable set of positions to deal with. You've got, sport shooters, farmers, people with indigenous rights on one hand, and then on the other, we have organizations who would like to have the government, without any discernment or restriction, simply ban the sale and possession of firearms. Not easy to handle such a stretch of opinions, especially when the whole is being politicized, because there, is a political aspect to C21. Is there any way that you think we could improve the safety of all Canadians, and that's a very justified aim, without penalizing Canadians who own weapons, who have purchased them, who have registered them, and who use them safely? There's no safe way to use these weapons. We would like to get these weapons out of the market. As for hunters, though, we have not said we're against hunting. But we are certainly wouldn't want hunters to be buying banned weapons that aren't, classified as hunting weapons, that aren't the sort of things you use to go hunting. The SKS, for example. It's a Russian assault weapon that's wound up in Canada. It's not been declassified, if you wish, in Russia, but it's still an assault weapon. It's an assault weapon in Russia. Of course, using a long gun to hunt, no one is against that. But assault-type weapons, whether they're new or old, I disagree with those being in circulation, Senator. We have a colleague who's been going through the registers for 40 years, he says, but I say that these assault-style weapons must be removed from Canada. Ancestral rights, yes, with long guns for hunting and recognized as being appropriate for hunting, yes, of course, and we don't object to that. Is there any time left, Chair? Yes, thank you. You know that Canada is a very large country. There's a lot of uninhabited land. In this debate, do you think there's a social distinction that, safety level distinction that we could make between rural and urban areas of the country? In rural areas, people would like to hunt or would like to be protected against dangerous wildlife like bears, but they're not criminals. So do you think that we need to emphasize the difference between rural and urban Canadians? Homicides with firearms, there are more of them in rural areas compared to urban areas. And mostly long guns are used to carry out these homicides, whereas in the cities, handguns are used. But the city with the highest rate of homicides using a firearm is Regina. Also, handguns and assault weapons that aren't relevant to hunting, aren't really divided by urban or rural areas. There are sport shooters and using them everywhere.
Is next.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. I would like to ask you, Ms. Provost, and also Ms. Zaccour, and anybody else can comment as well. I, for one, find it incredibly frustrating that we have the kind of rhetoric and discussion that's happening right now around this bill at the same time as violence against women in particular is being ignored or being used to buttress the development of other kinds of legislation, whether it's longer, more punitive sentences or other changes to the criminal law. And I'm curious as to what appetite you've seen from any of the governments since 1989 in particular and beyond to implement the types of recommendations that, whether it's the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, whether it's the mass casualty, that repeatedly call upon the need for resources to be put in place to address at a fundamental level violence against women in particular. Obviously it applies to other folks as well, but in particular that issue hasn't been dealt with. Do you have any recommendations for us as to any observations or any other areas that we could be making recommendations at this committee?
I mean, it's for sure that we support all efforts to reduce intimate partner violence. The shooting at l'École Polytechnique was an attack against women. It was a feminicide. In terms of gun violence, it's been a constant challenge to have domestic murders of women by guns, threats taken seriously. And if I look back on all the years that we worked on this file, Bill C21, the consultations we had with Minister Marco Mendicino, I feel it was the first time that we were listened to in terms of that aspect of gun control, and that is reflected in the bill with these strong measures on domestic violence. But at the same time, one of the big problems is the application of the law. There's way too much discretion in terms of what the police does and what the chief CFOs do. And that's why the bill tightens that discretion, makes some preventative measures mandatory. But that is an ongoing problem that needs to be addressed, and we've called for more funding, we've called for more education to make the enforcement more sensitive to issues surrounding intimate partner violence. Police have to take the warnings, the complaints of women much more seriously, and I think the tragedy in Nova Scotia demonstrates very clearly how, and the recent case in Sault Ste. Marie, how risk factors surrounding intimate partner violence are not factored into decisions with respect to revoking licenses, removing guns rapidly, and so on.
Thank you. I don't know. Is there time for Ms. Zaccour, or am I out of time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, a minute.
Ms. Zaccour, would you like to comment on any of the equality measures that you feel need to be? I don't even know where to look. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. We have such a list of priorities. We want guaranteed minimum income. We want free legal representation for women. We want family law reform to enable women to leave abusers. We have a very long agenda. I think we'll need many years to continue advocating for these changes. And every time there's a bill, we will try to get whatever improvement we can get, knowing that it's never going to be the full solution. So we believe that a woman who's threatened with a gun, it makes it very difficult for her to leave the situation. And we believe that the measures in C21 will provide real help and safety for women. But absolutely, there's always so much more to be done. And that's why we we intervene in so many of these bills and will continue to do so. And a holistic response to intimate partner violence is absolutely crucial.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, I'm afraid this brings us to the end of our panel. The time has passed very, very quickly. I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to Ms. Zaccour, Ms. Rathjen, Ms. Provost, and Mr. Benabdallah. We greatly appreciate the time that you've spent with us today and the many contributions you've made in sharing your experiences with us. Some of those have been painful, some of those have been tragic, and I know that you carry those things into this room, and it's important that we hear about them. I just want to end by thanking you on behalf of this committee, all the members of this committee, and the Senate of Canada as a whole, for the work that each of you does every day. It's important, it's difficult. You've been doing it for a long time. It's a long haul, and you're not stopping, and we appreciate that, and we encourage you to continue that work on behalf of our colleagues and communities out there. So thank you very, very much. Colleagues, we'll now suspend briefly and prepare for our second panel. Colleagues, we will now continue with our next panel. For those tuning in to today's meeting, we're exploring Bill C21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, all in relation to the regulation of firearms. For this next hour, we have the pleasure of welcoming here in the room from Women's Shelters Canada, Lise Martin, Executive Director, and from Regroupement des maisons pour femmes victimes de violences conjugales, Louise Riendeau, co-lead political issues. Thank you for joining us today. We now invite you to provide your opening remarks, to be followed by questions from our members. I remind you that you each have 5 minutes for your testimony. We will begin with Ms. Lise Martin. Please proceed when you are ready.
Okay.
C'est déjà connecté, utilise.
Okay. Maybe just ask her to start again.
Nathan, get yourself organised.
Yeah.
We good? Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee. Women's Shelters Canada is a national non-profit organization representing 16 provincial and territorial shelter associations and the more than 600 violence against women shelters and transition houses from across the country. Bill C21 is an important bill for those of us concerned with gender-based violence. Many of the measures contained within it have long been demanded by women's organizations. While it is not perfect, we support this bill and believe it should be implemented quickly. Bill C21 contains many of the recommendations from the Mass Casualty Commission, which called upon the Government of Canada to strengthen gun control measures, to improve protections for survivors of gender-based violence, and to ensure better tracking and reporting of assault weapons. Violence against women is a public health crisis. Firearms increase risk and likelihood of fatality for women and children that are experiencing violence. Guns are used to terrorize, injure, and kill women and their children in urban as well as rural settings. We know that the risks are higher in rural communities where there are more guns and more opposition to gun control and fewer supports for women living with violence. From 2009 to 2020, 25% of female victims of firearm-related violent crime was victimized by a current or former intimate partner. Additionally, the presence of firearms in the home made women more fearful for their safety and less likely to seek help for the abuse they were facing. Most women in Canada are killed with legal guns and by legal gun owners. The 2022 Renfrew County inquest specifically addressed the additional risks with respect to femicide and suicide posed by gaps in the application of risk assessment and gun licensing laws and regulations,
particular to the rural context. The amendments requiring the delivery of a firearm to a peace officer and the revocation of an individual's license if they have engaged in an act of domestic violence or stalking or become subject to a protection order responds to concerns raised through the inquest and the Mass Casualty Commission. We previously were concerned about the lack of measures for the swift removal of firearms and licenses. It has been documented numerous times that women are at the highest levels of danger of lethality when they make it known to their abuser that they are leaving the situation. The addition of a 24-hour timeline for revoking firearms and licenses is important for ensuring the safety of victims. While we appreciate this amendment, we also want to underscore that revocations need to be enforced and resourced to ensure that they are completed. In our last submission on this bill, we raised the concern about the lack of definition of domestic and family violence within the bill. Without a clear and holistic definition of violence, chief firearms officers may have considered more limited definitions that only address direct injury. The adoption of the definition of family violence recently adopted in the Divorce Act within Bill C21 ensures that a wide range of violence is considered, including coercive control. Lastly, the bill previously authorized the issuance in certain circumstances of a conditional license for the purposes of sustenance or employment. While the removal of this item is appreciated, we continue to remain concerned about the remaining exemption for police officers. Although there is limited research in Canada, research done in the United States suggests that officers are actually more likely to abuse their domestic partners than the general public. In Nova Scotia alone, as reported in 2020, 14 police officers from across the province have been charged with crimes connected to domestic violence since 2012. In closing, I would like to stress the importance of the need to improve the processes associated with screening gun owners and removing firearms from people who are at risk to themselves or others. The federal government uses its power to make decisions about who can have firearm licenses. Important measures like spousal notification and reference checks, as well as continuous eligibility, were introduced to help ensure this power was used to refuse applicants and remove licenses from people who, in the position of the firearms officer, are a threat to themselves or any other person. Multiple inquests and inquiries and incidences of domestic violence have shown that this is not being done. Greater resources, commitments, and accountability measures are needed to ensure this responsibility is being exercised. The need for greater resources, commitments, and accountability measures goes far beyond this bill. This is one of the many reasons why Women's Shelters Canada has been advocating for a national action plan on gender-based violence for over a decade. Also important in our call for a national action plan is the need for consistency across and within jurisdictions in policies and legislation that address gender-based violence and violence against women. It will be important that this be an integral part of the implementation of this bill. Thank you.
Ms. Martin. Colleagues, our final witness today is Ms. Louise Riendeau. Ms. Riendeau, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Bonjour. Hello. Thank you to the members of this Senate committee for allowing us to share our view of gun control based on our work with thousands of women victims of domestic violence. We represent 46 shelters that assist women victims of domestic violence in every region of Quebec. We shelter over 2,000 women a year, and that many children as well, and have offered services 25,000 times to women and children not directly sheltered with us. We have taken a position at the House of Commons Committee on Public Safety and National Security a year ago, and also supported what was presented by hashtag Women for Gun Control that was presented to you by Women in the Law in the prior panel. We will speak about women's safety, the safety of children as well, people who are victims of domestic violence. This is what we know about. In our opinion, C21 contains important measures regarding domestic violence. For men and women, violence often occurs at home. There's no specific profile of their assailant. Aggressors can seem normal, well adapted, and seem to respect the law. Domestic violence can be committed by people who own weapons legally, and the presence of firearms in the home considerably raises the chance that an aggressor will kill his partner. And indeed, women are 5 times more likely to be killed by their assailant if they have a firearm. And these assaults committed with firearms are 12 times more likely to become lethal than those committed with other weapons. Women who see this type of situation happening around them do come to us, and they tell us they're afraid of being killed by the firearms in their homes. The House of Commons Committee adopted a number of amendments that has strengthened the provisions of C21 regarding domestic violence. This is why we do support the passage of this bill by the Senate. It contains some important provisions that aim to protect victims. For example, the automatic ban on or prohibition on possessing a firearm for anyone who has been found guilty of violence or harassment in the home, and the obligation to have the Chief of Firearms withdraw a permit within 24 hours when they have a reasonable reason to believe that an individual has been involved in domestic violence or has stalked someone, and having a broader definition of domestic violence that captures all types of family violence, including non-physical types such as coercive control, which is often present when homicide occurs later, adding a order of protection that covers all types of protection of relevance that differ from province to province and territory to territory. The possibility of having banning orders taken out against people who live with someone who also is not allowed to have a firearm. The exclusion of jobs that supposedly exempt people from having their permit withdrawn, although this is not for police officers, and removing the permission of someone who is affected by a ban to get rid of their weapon in any way they like, including by selling it. Of course, there are a number of things that remain of concern. We are opposed to the red flag approach, which allows someone to go before a court to have a permit withdrawn. Given that victims and other persons who are worried about the situation have already spoken to police officers or to the chief firearms officers, we think that adding anything else is counterproductive. We're afraid that police officers would not go ahead, take action, and ask victims to go before courts and do it themselves. This seems excessive. We will follow how this measure is applied, and if we find that police officers or the chief firearms officers are not carrying out their duties and asking victims to do things instead, we will get back to the legislator. The principal shortcoming is that the current bill does not prohibit assault weapons that are currently on the market. We invite senators to support regulations that we hope will be drafted to ban all military-style assault weapons that are not used for hunting and can't reasonably use for hunting. In conclusion, even though the bill is imperfect, it does offer important measures of protection. The debates on C21 have been ongoing for months, and we don't feel that they will allow the House to go any further on this if a recommendation is made to have them look again at the bill. That's why we ask the Senate to carry this bill without amendment so that finally this may become law. Thank you so much, Ms. Riendeau.
Questions. Our panel today finishes at 1:30 p.m. and as with the last panel, I will limit each question, including the answer, to 4 minutes, and I will hold up this card to indicate that 30 seconds remain in your time. Please endeavour to keep your questions short and identify the person you are addressing the question to. I offer the first question to our Deputy Chair, Senator Dagenet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Ms. Riendeau. Ms. Riendeau, I would like to hear you on a specific issue, sentencing for legal possession and illegal use of firearms. In your opinion, Is there a strong enough position being taken? Are people being dissuaded, or should the government should ensure that delinquents be locked up longer? Well, we could talk about the penalties, and in some cases they might seem insufficient. We think that we really need to lean on prevention. And that's why we were very pleased to see in this bill measures that do allow for better protecting victims, forbidding, for example, the possession of weapons, banning them when there is a order to protect someone, when there is family violence, domestic violence. Prevention is, I believe, more relevant to victims who are afraid, more important than sentencing, even though, of course, victims may expect strong sentences. And, of course, they are the ones who are most concerned. So in cases of domestic violence, often this can be reported to the police. People will go before a court, and then often there will be a ban on firearms, and police officers will seize the firearms. So what leads you to feel that the police officers might not carry out these duties? Yes, especially when there's a court order, they will. But at this point, if a victim is very worried, feels unsafe, feels that their partner or someone around them has mental health issues and has a firearm, can go without necessarily waiting for a court order, can go directly to a police officer or a chief firearms officer and ask them to investigate and make a request to have the firearms seized. This seems to me and to us a better path. It's not as difficult for potential victims, easier than going to a court and denouncing someone. Of course, when they do go to a court and denounce someone, we're very happy to see that orders follow shortly and that weapons are seized. But we do think it's important to ensure that women are able to speak about their concerns to officers and chief firearms officers and have them take action. We worry that given this bill's providing that women can speak directly to the courts, well, that's fine. But, you know, police officers are very busy. They've got a lot to do. And we worry that people who are really sensitive to the issue of domestic violence, who aren't sensitive to all the difficulties that the victims are already dealing with, will, you know, take this lightly and say, look, madame, just go to the court and you can get an order yourself. Thank you. Thank you.
We now go to Senator O.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. My question is, we have interviewed Dr. Cunningham Langston, Assistant Clinical Professor at the McMaster University, has said that this is going to be a waste of money. He told our committee the following: I think that $1 billion would be better off spent on programs that will have a benefit. As an emergency physician, I see people coming in with suicidal ideation from issues that they have in terms depression, and it's extremely difficult to get them help. We look at wait time of over 6 months for some of the people. We have a shortage of physicians who are working in this area. The reality is that government has a very limited amount of money, and in the years ahead, available money will become even more tighter. My question, are you not concerned that wasting $750 million or more on a bill that many argue that would not work and is not going to contribute to making the funding problem for important initiatives like the women's shelter make the women's shelter even worse?
I guess I can start. I definitely don't think it's a waste of resources. I think in general, our society needs to have greater investments in social justice, so in the health system, but it's not an either or. And I think we're talking about human lives here, saving human lives, and we're talking specifically in terms of incidents of domestic violence. And therefore, I think that, you know, the removal of guns from the system will decrease the number of femicides across the country, and just that fear from women and their children.
Riendeau.
Well, I will add that the very fact that women and children are terrorized by the very presence of these weapons in their homes, illegal, by the way, generally speaking, in matters of domestic violence, leads to a considerable social cost, given that being terrorized on a daily basis, they themselves become mentally ill. Physical illnesses are another effect, and they have to use the legal system, justice system. I think we need to invest at a number of levels. If we hope to eliminate or considerably reduce the levels of violence against women, Ms. Martin was speaking of a national action plan against violence affecting women. This would require prevention, control such as this one, gun control, and victim support. If our society is indeed a society which is fighting against the violence that women experience, we need to take all these measures.
Senator Deacon, representing Ontario.
I'm going to pass my time at this moment.
Senator Cardoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to ask you to help us with an issue, or at least help me with an issue. You've talked about the high rate of domestic violence in rural areas. You've talked about the less supports there are for women. There are a higher number of firearms sometimes. Yet in the overall debate that we have, this is portrayed somehow as a rural versus urban issue, north versus south, even west versus east. Help me with that sort of debate of understanding more about the presence of violence in the rural issues, and it's not just a downtown Toronto or downtown Montreal issue. What is it that we're not hearing enough of in terms of? And I just want to add one other piece. There is a certain argument for the use of guns for hunters and farmers, and sometimes hunting in the far north is a subsistence issue. How do you square this with us, and how can you make the argument more clearly? How can we all make the argument more clearly?
I can take that. I think that what we're calling for is not restrictions on the rights of hunters, people who need to use firearms for subsistence, but some level of control to be applied when these people do, and some can, become threatening. We have some shelters in large cities, such as Montreal and Quebec, but most of them are out in rural areas, out in the regions of Quebec, where people often hunt, and there are many firearms in circulation. And we do see that the women living in these areas, you know, when they call on our services, really fear for their lives, fear for the lives of their animals, their children. And that's why we feel that measures must be adopted to ensure that weapons that aren't necessarily being used for hunting, you know, assault weapons and military-style weapons. I mean, I have nephews who hunt, and they're certainly not using that sort of weapon to go hunting deer. So the measures we're calling for aim to protect people, to protect women, and Bill C21 does contain provisions that will help us to better protect men and or women and girls and boys, mostly, who are dealing with this.
Comment?
Well, I was just going to say that I think the issue is that it's often perceived that guns are more present in urban areas, and whereas in the rural areas, there are guns present in terms of there are more guns, and then the services, there are less services available for women there. And even in terms of, we were talking about responses from police forces, for example. Well, in many of those rural areas, the services are few and far between. And, for example, in the territories, there are many communities that don't have shelters, that don't have those resources. So I think that's where we're highlighting the specific issues in rural areas and the particularities with this bill and the presence of guns in those areas.
Thank you. Senator Dasko, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses today. I'd like to drill down a little bit on what both of our witnesses have said about the importance and need for a definition of domestic violence. And I certainly am familiar with the Divorce Act. It was one of the first acts I worked on when I was appointed to the Senate, and I'm not a lawyer, so I was drowning in it. But in any case, so tell me both of you tell me why this is needed or why this would be important. So what is the problem with the way it is now? So I question to both. Ms. Martin.
Okay.
Well, my understanding is that the bill will use the definition from the Divorce Act, which is a comprehensive definition of domestic violence. And again, to make it clear to all of the different actors that are involved in the issues, from police officers, from service providers, that domestic violence goes far beyond, bruises and what you can see, and thus coercive control is a big part of it. And that fear, again, and even, in this particular case, that use of guns in the house, that presence of guns used as an element to instigate that fear and that potential of killing the person. So that's why it's important that we all get this wider interpretation, understanding of domestic violence.
So you feel it is fine the way it is, or are you looking for something?
No, my sense is it is what yes.
It's dealt with in a satisfactory way.
Yeah.
May I ask Madame Riendeau the question as well? If you could elaborate,
oui.
That would be great.
Absolument.
Yes, indeed, of course. Look, when you aren't really aware of this, and even legal specialists make this mistake, when you really don't know then what domestic violence is, what it really means on a day-to-day basis for the victims, often you think it is a physical matter, physical violence. You don't really understand the continuum of violence that women are subjected to, the levels of control, coercive control, on a daily basis. That's why it's important to adopt a broad definition. Studies have been carried out in the United States showing that in a third of the homicides studied, there had not been prior physical violence before the woman was killed or the homicide. Another study carried out in the UK demonstrated that in 87% of the cases studied, there was coercive control prior to the violence. So we do need to explain to everyone what violence is, what forms it takes in these situations, the level of fear that people experience for their own safety or for the safety of other members of their family, and the definition in the Divorce Act does that.
We have Senators Pate and Boisvenu still on the list, and we will have some more time if any other senators around the room wish to ask some questions. Senator Pate, you are next.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses for for your lifelong work and also for your appearance today. I'd like to allow you an opportunity to elaborate on some of the other ways that, in addition to this bill, other policy approaches need to be implemented. I'm thinking in particular of the issues that both of you have touched on, which is when women aren't believed when they go forward. And that's partly definition, but it seems to me it's also much more often about the believability of women versus, and I often think of when men first started coming forward with histories of abuse in religious, by religious orders, it was the homophobia that meant that men were believed when women were coming forward and they weren't being believed. And so I'm curious as to whether there are other measures that you see that we should be adding observations or suggesting that the government act on.
Sure. I think there are a number of measures out there, and more recently, the National Action Plan, for example. In all of these measures, and there are a lot of good laws that exist, it's the implementation that is often lacking. And from our perspective, it's also the resources in terms of accountability, because we feel a responsibility to follow up, to ensure that these laws are actually providing the services or providing the protection that it's meant to be. And just, for example, the recent passing of Kira's law. So in a year's time, how are we going to measure that is actually making a difference in women's lives? And so that's what we really want to see. And we feel it's important that this accountability not just be internal, and that external actors and organizations that have been working in this area for decades need to be involved in this accountability.
Anything to add from Ms. Riendeau, please?
Oui, j'ajouterais que... Yes, I will add that among the elements that we brought up, training is quite an essential one. Here again, my colleague was mentioning responsibility. Let me take the example of Quebec. We have legislation about specialized courts where it's stated there must be a report produced every year about training offered to everyone involved and all associations involved in the operations of that court. We think that police officers, will spend hours documenting the level of inebriation of someone who's caught driving having drunk, but not spend much time questioning a woman about violence, especially in rural areas where there aren't that many police officers. So if we want to be effective, we must provide the right conditions to ensure that those who are responsible for listening to victims are able to have the time to and are trained to.
Much. Senator Boisvenu closes out this round, and then Senator Dagenet is on tap for round two. Senator Boisvenu.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Hello, Ms. Riendeau. It's nice to see you again. Ms. Riendeau, I've gone through the statistics carefully about criminality and matters of firearms affecting women, and I was surprised to see that between 1974 and 2004, so over 30 years then, 75 women were assassinated in 2004, 32. And looking at current statistics, less than 20 women have been murdered a year. Comparing statistics in the cities, 5 out of 6 are killed in a rural area, at least with another method, such as they've been stabbed or strangled, and that seems to be the preferred method. So my question is, all the publicity around this bill, doesn't it give women a false sense of security? People may think that just carrying this bill will simply ensure that there will be no more femicides. no measure can solve the problem in its entirety. What we're saying is that when an assailant wants to kill someone, is trying to kill someone, and uses a firearm, they're more likely to succeed than if they use, let's say, a knife or something else. So we think that this is one way to go about preventing some of the homicides, femicides in this case. But that said, a number of measures have to be adopted. Again, the statistics in urban areas, 5 out of 6 are killed with, often by being stabbed with knives. That seems to be quite lethal. Now, it seems that deaths using handguns has doubled over the same period of time, and now we're about to ban handguns. But all the handguns that are already circulating, there's no measure being applied to them. So I'm wondering whether this bill will really make a difference or not. Will it really bring down the numbers of femicides? Well, yes, we can look at the statistics, but we can also, and this is what we see in the shelters that we operate, look at the level of terror that women are living with. The very fact that there are these weapons in the house, these firearms are used to threaten them with death, and it becomes a very real threat to them, and they're terrorized. I don't think we should forget this. But in Canada, if we compare 1974 to the year 2000 or 2004, in 74 there were about 100 seizures of firearms based on complaints of police officers. In 2004, 20,000 weapons were seized based on complaints of either domestic violence or mental illness. Those are the two main reasons. So a woman living in fear can turn to police officers to ensure that the weapons are seized, no? Yes, of course. Look, you're comparing things to 1974 when there was pretty much no measure whatsoever available to fight this level of violence against women. And, you know, it was taken to be a private matter, violence in the household and all this kind of stuff, family violence. So having learned since then, we've learned that our country was right to adopt a number of measures, some legislative, some of a preventive nature, some by offering support to victims. And I think that C21 is another step in the right direction to ensure the safety of women and children.
Thank you. We now close with Senator Dagenet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question.
Thank you, Chair. And my question will be for Ms. Martin. Ms. Martin, Bill C21 provides for recognizing the ancestral rights of Indigenous peoples to possess firearms, and there are shelters in Canada which work specifically with Indigenous women, some of whom are victims of violence. There are 10 or 12 of them, actually, or 12 or 13 of them in the province of Quebec, of these shelters. And you say that violence against women is often, carried out by an intimate partner. And given that there is violence against women in the Indigenous communities, I would like to know about what you think of the constitutionally accepted presence of firearms in those communities.
Of the inherent rights for hunting of Indigenous populations. I think that's what you're asking.
Oui, mais il en reste qu'il y a des crimes.
Yes, but that being said, these firearms are also used to commit acts of violence. So what level of acceptability should we really tolerate? Indeed, but I think that we need adequate services, preventive services as well. And if services are adequate, when women do feel they're in danger, when they're fearful, they will also feel that they can turn to these services, to shelters, for example. for assistance in these situations. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We come to the end of our questions, but I'm going to add one. It's unusual for me to do this, but it's also unusual that we conclude a meeting early. So I'm going to ask each of our witnesses briefly if there is anything that you would like to say by way of closing remarks that hasn't already been prompted by a previous question, or that there is a closing piece of advice that you'd like to leave with us today. And let me start with Ms. Riendeau.
Well, as I have said, we certainly hope that the bill will be adopted, and quickly. We hope that the Senate, on the day that regulations become available to better frame the use of assault weapons, that the Senate will support them as well, because those would provide another level of protection for women. Otherwise, things happen. But look, one thing I may add, when it's necessary to weigh different rights, you need to try to figure out what counts most. Let me give you an example. In Quebec, there were debates about 20 years ago about protecting privacy, the right to privacy. And our Parliament legislated that when it comes to choosing between the right to safety and the right to privacy, which of course is important, the safety trumps privacy. So that's the type of issue that you are being asked to weigh today. Thank you.
Ms. Martin, and I see that Senator Pate has been prompted to have another question. So please, over to you, though, first, Ms. Martin.
Sure. I would just underscore the importance of recognizing violence against women as an epidemic. It is a social issue. Society at large is responsible. It is not just governments. All actors of society are responsible to act on it. I think we need to recognize it. We need to name it. And I think this is one measure that will help address the situation of violence against women, the epidemic that it is in our society. And that's why we would ask senators to approve the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Senator Pate, over to you, the last question.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, it did prompt me. When Ms. Riendeau, when you talked about regulations, regulations won't come before us unless it's another bill where we're looking at how the regulations were promulgated that relate to this. So I want to provide you both with an opportunity to talk about what sorts of regulations you do think need to happen, so perhaps that can be something that this committee could comment upon. And then just building on your last comment, I want to call you Lise, but Ms. Martin, and we've known each other for a long time. It's one thing to call something an epidemic, but it strikes me that we keep coming up with new ways to try and say this is a really important issue, when really what's happening is it's not being taken seriously yet. That if we continue to see the social, health, and economic inequality that women experience, I was struck earlier this week, or last week, by the women in Iceland, where they've been #1 in equality for a long, long time, going on strike because they're still not equal, because of pay gaps and because of violence against women. And we're a long way from that. So it strikes me just, and I don't mean to diminish in any way calling it an epidemic, but it also strikes me we need to make much stronger, do much more work to ensure that the equality provisions exist, that we passed. They didn't come into effect till 1985 because we recognized in 1982 with the repatriation of the Constitution that we weren't equal yet. Took 3 years, but it's almost like we aren't still challenging the fact that legal equality has not been matched by financial, health, and race and certainly gender equality. So I want to provide one last opportunity for anything else you'd like to add, particularly around the regulations for this bill, but any other commentary that you think you want to make sure is on the record as we're considering this issue, which has been fueled by and the issue of violence against women.
Let Louise speak to the regulations part.
Ms. Riendeau, and we'll give you a minute each to respond to this, if we could. Ms. Riendeau.
Sur le règlement, on parle. About regulations, we were speaking of regulations that the minister has promised to promulgate regarding the ban on military-style assault weapons that aren't useful for hunting. But I would like to talk to you about legalization. You're correct, Senator Pate, that we have been moving forward, but that there's no overall measure that really allows us to put an end to violence against women, the lack of equality, and yes, the fact that things still aren't equal for women leads to the fact that women are still being assaulted. But we do need a national plan to counter violence against women, and we need to work on this from all angles. Let's stop, carving off small approaches that don't necessarily go hand in hand.
Part of what you're saying is in terms of, the word use of different language epidemic is that for some people, there's a fatigue almost. But the reality is that there's been a lot of backlash. In terms of violence against women, the numbers of femicide have increased dramatically over the years. And that's why we continue to come and to try to convey how pervasive this is in society. Violence against women doesn't discriminate. Anyone can face this from their intimate partner. Although there are, certain groups of women who are more disadvantaged in terms of how violence against women affects them, in terms of racialized women, women with disabilities, Indigenous women. And therefore, it's really, I guess I can't stress how important it is that this be factored in, because if a woman is living violence, it's impossible for her to achieve equality. With violence against women so pervasive in our society, we will never achieve equality. And I think that's something we are all aiming for. And again, I would say with this issue, I've always said violence against women is a nonpartisan issue, and I think that is something that's really important to remind ourselves. And in the context of the National Action Plan, it's not, again, about what levels of government. We all need to work together to address this.
Thank you. Colleagues, this brings us to the end of today's meeting. On behalf of this committee, and in fact on behalf of the Senate of Canada as a whole, I extend our gratitude, our deep gratitude to Ms. Martin, and Ms. Riendeau for sharing your expertise and experience with us. And I take the opportunity to thank you also for the crucially important work that you do. Every day and many nights and on weekends, I know you do this. And it's important that you hear that. I'm sure you do. You probably don't hear it enough. So on behalf of all of us here, we want you to know that we join the many people who appreciate that. So thank you. Colleagues, we will continue our examination of the bill tomorrow, Thursday, November 2nd at 9:30 a.m. Eastern in room 128. Thank you for your participation. Oh, sorry, 9 a.m. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you for your participation here today, and I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.